Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to BioStrategy Partners Practical Knowledge Series panel for June. My name is Michele Washko. I'm the Executive Director of BioStrategy Partners. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Our sponsors are MVM Associates, Cesar Rivas, and University Place Associates. Today's topic is working with technology transfer offices, best practices for faculty, researchers, and founders. And we have a fantastic panel for you today, which will our participating moderator is Dr. Camille Jolly-Tornetta. She will guide the discussion today along with our speakers. I'm going to encourage each of them to introduce themselves. But before I turn it over to Camille, what I'd like to do is to just let you know a little bit about BioStrategy Partners. We are a not-for-profit organization that's designed to enhance and accelerate technology transfer. We have two key programs. One is our Germinator program, which facilitates industry academic partnerships, and this practical knowledge series. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Camille.
Thank you, Michele. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank first BioStrategy Partners as well as our sponsors for having me and the panel here today. We look forward to our discussion today. Hopefully it's a lively one. I'm currently the director of the Technology Transfer Office at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where we are responsible for the identification, protection, and commercialization of CHOP's innovations. Prior to CHOP, most of my career has been on the other side in industry, primarily in small biotech and startups and small pharma, working on intellectual property strategies and licensing. I'll now allow Tim to introduce himself.
Sure, I'm Tim Hurley. I'm presently Associate Director in the Office of Technology Management at Penn State. My primary role at OTM is to assist the licensing staff in developing commercialization strategies for our technology portfolio. In addition, I work closely with Penn State's Office of Entrepreneurship and Commercialization on a variety of technology commercialization activities that have been implemented as part of the Invent Penn State initiative. And before joining Penn State about 4 years ago, I spent over 20 years involved in technology-based startup companies, several of which had in-licensed Penn State intellectual property. Most recently, I was president of Diapedia, LLC, which developed an innovative orthosis for people with foot problems related to diabetes. And we had raised about $9 million of SBIR funding from NIH for that business. I was also president of two other Penn State spin-outs, Expansion Technologies, a biomass to biofuel conversion research and development company, and ChiralQuest, an angel and venture-backed company that developed catalyst technology for the production of pharmaceutical intermediates and fine chemicals. Niraj?
Thank you, Tim. Thanks, Camille, and thank you, Michele. I'm Niraj Muni. I'm the Associate Director of Technology Commercialization at Temple University. And I've been at Temple for 9 years now. And prior to that, I had a brief stint with University of Illinois at Chicago, their tech transfer office. And prior to that, I had gained significant experience working for biotech startups in Chicago. So it was a good move coming from the industry, the startup background into tech transfer. And here at Temple, I manage Temple's intellectual property portfolio across various fields, pretty much across the board, together with my colleagues in my team. And I also handle the licensing of the intellectual property, and I work closely with our senior director of startups, Todd Abrams, to figure out commercialization strategy of Temple Innovations. So I look forward to this panel now.
Thank you, Niraj. So as Michele mentioned, we're here today to really dive into how to basically work with tech transfer offices. Tech transfer offices were originally created really after the enactment of the Bayh-Dole Act in 1980, and since then have really proliferated, not only in the United States, but throughout the world, which the Bayh-Dole Act really gave academic institutions the ability to take ownership of federally funded inventions. And this basically prompted a tremendous increase in the patenting and licensing of academic technologies. As technology transfers were offices were really originally created, really were to manage and protect intellectual property that comes out of a university or research institution and facilitate the commercialization of those technologies. Patents give businesses the protections and securities they need to license, to invest and develop discoveries into patents or into products for the public benefit. Because the protection of IP or intellectual property is critical to the commercialization of that intellectual property, researchers should really engage their tech transfer offices as soon as they believe they have an interesting invention, and definitely before any public use or dissemination, such as publications, abstracts, presentations, discussions with anyone outside of the institution. So in general, researchers are encouraged to really reach out at any time. It really can't be too early with any questions that they have about our processes, about our policies. Most institutions have patent policies. About intellectual property. They just have questions in general on intellectual property and what it is. And commercialization, how they can facilitate moving their technologies out of the institutions and into the public, which leads us to sort of understand what actually happens in tech transfer offices. What are their processes? How do you engage with them? Maybe Niraj, you can talk a little bit about how you work with potential inventors or inventors and how they can engage the office, and what is the process of actually submitting an invention and the patenting process.
Sure. So we encourage all researchers, all faculty members, even staff. They would have ideas. Students, everybody really across the board at Temple, to contact us, to reach out to our office if they have any innovative ideas, and if they want to discuss further with us, they want to seek our consult, and or if they want to figure out a strategy for further development and commercialization of their ideas. We are always open and to their outreach, and we welcome them. So they can reach out to us informally like that, or they could also complete an invention disclosure form. As Camille mentioned, that this could happen at any point of time, the invention disclosure submission to our office, but we really prefer that it happens as early as possible, even at the time of conception of the idea. They don't necessarily have to have any data to support their ideas. So that ways we can guide them better. We certainly don't want them to indulge in getting data or conducting experiments which may not be required. So we want to guide them from the very onset of their invention disclosures. And once that happens, we'll work with them. We'll discuss their inventions. We'll try to strategize and guide them. And at an appropriate time, we would also consider filing patents. Now, patents, it's very important to remember. A lot of faculty members don't necessarily fully understand or appreciate that patents can be filed or can be awarded only for novel ideas or novel inventions. If an invention is already disclosed or disseminated to the public, it could be via conferences, via presentations, via papers, publications, even as simple as blogs. That really makes the novelty no longer novel of their invention, and that essentially affects the patentability of their invention. It really does a lot of harm to a point where it could also be deemed as non-patentable. So these are some of the do's and don'ts, and this is the single most critical don'ts, that please do not disclose it in any shape or form on any platform, in any medium. First talk with us. Once we decide on patent filing, continuing on the process after disclosure, work with the faculty for the strategy, and then there comes a point where we'll consider filing a patent. We'll file a patent, and once a patent is filed, the faculty can publish, can disclose, can present. And thereafter, we'll try to find a suitable industry partner or even an entrepreneur to spin it out and further develop and commercialize it. So it's really, we emphasize on the fact that try to come talk with them as early as possible.
What are some of the important things that you consider in order to move forward with a patent application?
So there are various considerations that go into making that determination. There really is no such thing as one size fits all. However, we try to address two questions at the most fundamental level, and that is, can this invention or novelty be patented, and should it be patented? Now, can it be patented? It depends on the prior art, or whether this invention can be deemed as novel or not. That's the key investigation that needs to be conducted to answer that question. Can this be patented? And the other aspect is, should this be patented? And that really falls on the commercial aspects of the invention. Really, is there a market? How easy is it to bring this invention to the market? What it's going to take? What resources are required? How long it would take? Would the market have moved on or evolved at that point of time? And I mean, this list can go on and on to make that determination to evaluate that specific question of should this be patented or not. But I can give a chance to Camille and Tim to add further to this.
I think the one thing that I would add that you've mentioned a few times is patentability, and there are definitely a number of things which I don't think it's always general knowledge or understandable in terms of what makes something actually patentable. And you mentioned prior art, so that's one. It has to be novel, which means there really can't be anything else out there that is exactly like yours. That would including your own public disclosures, that would potentially preclude it from being able to be patented. Another thing is non-obviousness, and this is much more challenging because it basically typically means that there's not multiple things out there that would lead someone to your invention. That's something much more I think we deal with the patent office in terms of really overcoming those obviousness type of rejections that we see. The other thing that's very important, and one of the reasons why we really like to discuss inventions with with the researchers in detail and really ask for, any and all information, data that they have. Is that the other piece of patentability is that you have to adequately describe your invention in sufficient detail to allow others to basically use your invention. So those are all very important aspects of patentability that I think all tech transfer offices take a look at. And in the more recent years, some of the other challenges are actually, is it patentable subject matter? I think, years ago, 20 plus years ago, we didn't really have to consider that. And most things fall into the sort of patentable bucket. You can file a patent application on them, but the patent laws have changed over the years in terms of what can actually be patented. So that's another area in which we have to look closely, just to say, can this be, would this be considered patentable subject matter, or is it going to get rejected outright? And some of those areas that are challenging these days are diagnostics, as well as software. I don't know, Tim, if you have anything to add.
I would just add, before I describe what we do at Penn State, on the non-obvious issue, we'll frame it with a researcher that, that comes down to if somebody as reasonably skilled as them, a peer at another research institution, could they come up with the same idea by, evaluating and assessing what's available in the public domain. So sometimes that helps our researchers frame, kind of an argument for that non-obviousness issue. So describing what we do at Penn State, from invention disclosure through these patenting decisions, much like Niraj described, we encourage our researchers to contact our office as early as possible, so that we can discuss the technology and develop a strategy for the disclosure and possible patent filing. So we get a lot of those inquiries, and in a lot of cases we're already aware that a disclosure is on the way. More recently, we've attempted to do a little bit more outreach to educate faculty in these areas and encourage them to submit early, or to at least call us and discuss their invention idea with us. So I know that at Hershey, through our Center for Medical Innovation, there's a lot of outreach activity going on there, and we have an equal effort going on at University Park. So once a disclosure is filed, it is assigned to a licensing officer, and that individual conducts an initial review and typically then meets with the inventor to determine, to learn more about the technology, but also to determine if there's been any enabling public disclosures that are planned or might have already occurred and may have compromised our ability to protect international rights. In most cases, the decision for us to file a provisional patent application is made by the licensing officer. And in calendar year 2020, our office filed about 85 provisional applications. So we do a fair amount of provisional filings. But that just really sets up a further review, because the provisional patent application is not prosecuted. It really is there to preserve the priority date of the invention. And we have a year after that provisional filing to decide if we're going to convert to a full US and/or international application, or allow the provisional application to go abandoned. And one of the things that I think is a little bit unique in this group maybe is that at Penn State, the decision to convert that provisional patent application is actually made by a committee, a patent review committee. And that committee consists of representatives from our office, Office of Technology Management, Center for Medical Innovation, the Office of General Counsel, as well as research deans from several of our academic colleges. And this committee was established years ago, and I don't know, Camille, you might know exactly when the provisional process was authorized under the patent law. I think it was maybe in the mid-90s. But when that action occurred, then there was this spike in provisional filings, and really that just kind of delayed the decisions, that were required for the full application. So this patent review committee was really established to help control costs associated with provisional conversions. As part of that review process, our licensing officers create what we call a technology assessment report for each case that comes for review. And these reports provide details on any sponsorship of the invention, which may have some obligation, in terms of rights, what the publication status is, if there's any ongoing research that continues the development of the technology. In many cases, a patentability assessment that was talked about earlier. Some read on the market potential, and then, of course, any potential licensing leads. And this committee meets quarterly to review and make the provisional conversion decisions. And then one point that I'd like to make for cases where we actually choose to file an international application, once we do that PCT application, we have about 18 months before we have to decide which countries we'd like to pursue prosecution. And for us, we typically require that the technology is licensed at that point before we'll incur those foreign costs, so that we have a licensee that will pay. So that's just an overview of how we handle the disclosure and patenting process here at Penn State.
Thanks, Niraj and Tim. I think one of the things that I think we've all said, that how important it is for researchers to reach out as early as possible, and definitely before any sort of public dissemination, of their invention. Can either of you share an instance in which there was a situation in which there was a public disclosure and how that impacted the technology? Niraj?
So we have an instance, and we come across these, but one thing that one specific case that comes to my mind is it's because I'm currently dealing with that situation, and that is the inventor presented the invention at a conference. Now, they had submitted the abstract, and although the abstract is considered as non-enabling, or it was in this case not enabling, that still was held as a prior art against inventor's own patent filing claiming that invention. And we've been trying hard to argue against using the abstract as a prior art for the determination in the allowance of the patent. So, excuse me, I'm sorry. The patent was filed after the abstract was submitted, however, before the actual presentation. So we had filed the provisional application in that window, but still, it's been an uphill battle trying to argue and fight with the patent office. And so, citing this example, I would always encourage that even before an abstract is submitted for a conference or really in any form, the invention is disclosed on any medium, on any platform, please talk with the tech transfer office and figure out a way to protect your invention. It's just really a matter of a few days. If you were to file a few days earlier before the abstract was submitted, all of this battle with the examiner, the patent office, wouldn't have been an issue.
Yeah, and I can add a bit to that. I think at our office, it's probably safe to say we've seen just about every scenario with regard to publication and impact on patenting. Ranging from a public disclosure, but we still have U.S. rights that we can protect because it's been within a year. Certainly seen cases where there's been public disclosure, then it's been more than a year and all rights have been lost. But I think the message that we try to convey to our faculty is that it's really not, publication or patenting, it's not an either or. Most often for us, it's both, that there is a publication. We just would like to have a chance to file before that becomes public. And we won't hold up a publication. So we can act pretty quickly to file a provisional with fairly short notice, although our preference is to have certainly enough time to make that provisional as thorough and detailed as possible. So we just encourage that early disclosure, but depending on the situation, we'll do what we need to do.
So if I can add, jump in a bit. Certainly we try to emphasize that our office will not hinder a publication. We will not stop a publication. Sometimes we may just request you to delay the publication by a few days until we've had a chance to file the provisional patent. And in many cases, we can file it as quickly as within 1 or 2 days. I think the benefit of filing a patent far outweighs the few days of delay in holding in a publication in most cases, almost every case, I should say. And also, it's very important for everyone to understand the importance of patent. I think it's really important for the faculty to know why patents are important, because oftentimes we come across researchers who do not believe in patents. They think patents hinder their research, patents hinder publication, and patents hinder dissemination of their knowledge. I just try to explain to them that patents are really important because patents are actually encouraging further investment into that area of research for further development, and eventually a product will happen with that investment in many cases. But if there were no patents, most investors, most industry partners, most companies, they will not invest in that innovation. They will not license because there is not much value because there is no protection for them. There is no protection to recoup their investment dollars. Let's just give an example. Let's say that there's a novel molecule that could be a great candidate for a drug. If the structure of that molecule and its effects are disclosed in a publication by the researcher, by the investigator, thinking, hey, you know what, I don't want to patent this. I want to just provide this compound to the world so that they can further investigate and develop into a drug if possible. But here, that's a folly, because once it's disclosed, it's no longer patentable. And it's common knowledge that in the field of pharma biotech, to take a molecule from bench all the way into the market, we're talking about tens to hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. Now, if the industry cannot have that patent protection to prevent others from entering the market with that drug, what will happen is, let's say hypothetically there is no patent, the compound is investigated and further developed by one of the pharma companies. They pour, let's say, $100 million into developing that. As soon as the drug is approved and it's marketed, without a patent, in the absence of a patent, the competitors will simply start manufacturing that drug and start marketing as well, and the generics will get flooded in the market, and there will be a lot of competition in that original pharma company which has invested $100 million. They will not be able to recoup that investment. And so what that means is, knowing this situation at the very beginning itself, no pharma company is going to invest in developing a molecule that does not afford any protection. And so even if as great a drug as it could have been, it will never see the light of the day. Hence, patents are important, citing this as an example.
Thanks, Niraj and Tim. So I think we've definitely made the point sort of among our offices and probably all tech transfer offices that, reach out early, definitely before any public disclosure. So important to be able to protect what is protectable in order for investments to be made in such invention and commercialization opportunities to occur. What are some other things to consider in terms of what other factors might affect the ability to commercialize? So, for example, Tim, you alluded to in your review process, one of the things you look at is the funding. Mm-hmm. So how might certain funding affect, such as sponsored research, government funding, impact the patenting and commercialization of an invention?
Well, sure. The funding, is essential to continued development. So this is, all part of the patent strategy is, understanding what the invention is today and understanding, what additional intellectual property may be developed in the future. And that's a critical part of assessing the patentability for that technology. So in the case of discovering a new compound and getting, composition of matter on that compound, that's one element of the invention. But then developing methods of, say, treating an individual that might have, a certain condition with that compound is another aspect of the IP. So, a lot of times we'll have researchers disclose that initial concept, and maybe they've got an R01 grant from NIH that's multiple years. Then there's, we recognize that there's, reasonable chance that there's going to be additional intellectual property created, as that funding plays out and as the research, proceeds. So, I think on, that's all part of the patenting strategy. Now, when that funding is coming from an industrial sponsor, then there's other considerations, certainly, because that sponsor is going to want to, in some way, have rights to foreground intellectual property that comes out of that research activity. And if there's background IP, they're also probably going to want to have access to that as well. So in those relationships, you're almost forced to deal with, the IP issues up front, because they'll become, contractual issues in that sponsored research activity.
Niraj, any input from you in terms of how you look at funding and potential barriers or non-barriers that they have to the development of the intellectual property?
So funding is, of course, one of the key criteria that we consider for evaluation of an invention. For example, if we have filed a patent and we find out that the inventor has lost the funding, could be federal funding or industry funding, or has moved on and is no longer pursuing that area of research, then the chances are that we will not consider maintaining that patent application. Similarly, if there's an increased level of funding, and even if, let's say, it's very crowded space and patentability is a suspect, but if there is significant dollars that are poured into that investment, that are being poured into that area of research for further development, will be highly supportive, because see, what happens is investments, they help further research, and with further research there could be newer innovations that will come online, and those newer innovations will now be patentable and commercializable. And these investments, as Tim said, could be federal dollars, industry investments, even investors, entrepreneurs, or anyone who's willing to further invest and develop that particular innovation.
Camille, I just thought of another circumstance that we do see that's kind of related to funding and the patenting process, and that is we'll have cases where the invention's at a very early stage, and there aren't necessarily plans to publish just yet, but there is additional funding that is allowing for that development work to continue. So in those cases, we'll advise, let's hold off on filing since there's not an imminent public disclosure, and allow the researchers to collect more data just to make that patent application stronger.
Right, I think that's a very good point. I think we see that as well. And I think that goes to sort of our points in terms of just engage our office. If it's early, I think one of the values that the tech transfer office can bring is actually helping to strategize and provide some advice in terms of what would be needed to move that from sort of that early stage idea or invention to something that actually could be the subject of patent application and potentially patentable. And so even if it's early, we're happy to learn about the research, but also provide some guidance in terms of what would we look for in order to sort of take it to the next step and in order to protect it. And so I think that's a great point. I think we also have, I would say, a number of technologies in which, we're sort of actively engaged in just following the research, where there's no necessarily IP yet, but it's very important just to be aware of it and to also provide any guidance that we can. Niraj, it looks like you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, so adding to that, Camille, one more point that occurs to me is that if our office knows what are the various areas of research being pursued by many of our faculty members, we often receive requests from our industry contacts, industry partners, that, hey, we are looking to collaborate with someone in this field, in this space, in this specialization. And that helps us pair and identify investigators within our organization. And oftentimes that leads to a successful collaboration with significant follow-on funding. And so even if there is no actual invention on hand for our faculty members, when they come and talk to us, just learning about their interests, their research interests, it really helps us in the future when an opportunity arises, pair them with our industry partners. It has really worked very well for us. In a way, we are handpicking or cherry picking these investigators for matching with the industry partners. It's not that we want to only support so-and-so investigators, but we are only able to support those investigators and pair them with the industry, because that's all that we know is their line of research. So if there were more people who would come and talk with us, more investigators who would come and disclose their field of research, it can only help us again for pairing.
I think that's a great point. So I think we've definitely sort of covered a lot of ground in terms of how researchers can interact with our office and how we can provide guidance, protection of IP, as well as working with industry partners to move forward the IP. For entrepreneurs, how do you engage them, or how can they engage your offices to learn about available technologies or opportunities for collaboration?
Yeah, I can start on that topic and just maybe describe the commercialization pathways for intellectual property that comes through our office. And really, there's two primary pathways to get the technology transferred and translated. We either license the technology to an established company, or we license the technology to a startup company that's formed solely to develop that particular innovation. And the path we take for any given technology really depends on a number of factors. And I'll describe a few of the factors that we look at, and then maybe my colleagues can comment as well. But first, we start with the level of interest and engagement from industry. And we have a number of tools that we use to solicit interest in our technologies. We use subscription services like InPart to showcase. And we also have our own IP navigator that allows third parties, interested parties to search database of available technologies for licensing. We also rely heavily on industry connections that our researchers have, that they've made during their conduct of their research, as well as the network of Penn State alumni that work in related areas. So we use all these resources to connect with industry, and really what we're trying to do is to determine whether or not our technology has the potential to meet a market need. Do we have a problem that we're able to solve that actually has commercial value? And when we find that fit, there's a greater likelihood of a collaboration with a commercial partner that may ultimately lead to a license agreement. So that's kind of what we do to bring exposure to our technologies. On the startup side, I would say there's really two circumstances where we'll pursue a startup approach when licensing, and one is inventor-driven, and the other is investor-driven. And to date, most of our startups are on the inventor-driven side, where the research group, a faculty member, and maybe a grad student or a postdoc express an interest in starting a company to develop commercial applications stemming from the research. And if we get into that situation, we encourage our faculty to engage in entrepreneurial programs that are available to them to educate on the various aspects of what it's like to be involved in starting a technology-based business. We have programs like the Ben Franklin Tech Accelerator, and then Center for Medical Innovation, their I-Core at NCATS program. One of the challenges that we have at Penn State that I think is probably not the case in Philadelphia, and more specifically at University Park, is the lack of local resources that we have available to support startups, most notably in the area of early stage funding, seed funding, and venture funding, as well as business management talent. And we're trying to address these issues and change the entrepreneurial culture. And kind of toward this end, we do now have a local early stage venture fund, 1855 Capital, and we've also established a network of experienced business professionals to help mentor our young startups. That's the Penn State Startup Leadership Network. So that's on the inventor-driven side. We also more recently are working with several early stage investor groups that have identified from the outside of Penn State technology that they feel could be the basis for a startup. And we currently have several technologies under evaluation with 4 different investor groups, and pretty confident that one or more of those will lead to a startup license. 2 other factors that we look at in which path we ought to go is, one is the development stage of the technology. Most university technology are very, very early stage, and require significant development before they're market ready. And while established companies may have the resources to take on those development activities and scale the technology, those resources are limited, and they're going to only be applied to projects that really fit that organization's goals. So sometimes a startup is really the best mechanism to advance the development of the technology to the point where it becomes a more attractive opportunity for a larger company. And that's not to say that a startup's role is only in that development side. We certainly have cases where startups have grown into operating companies. But I really think that the university startup has the best chance to create downstream value when it's focused really on those few key issues to de-risk the technology to make it more attractive to a partner. And finally, we'll look at market opportunity in terms of which path we might go. And there are situations where the available market for a given technology is modest and maybe not to the level that would compel a larger company to engage and make an investment. But that market potential may be more than adequate for a smaller startup. And, I'll give an example based on my experience. One of our startup companies, we have in-licensed technology. It was from the ag school at Penn State, a turfgrass technology. And our aim was to have it for, a few years and then, build it up and transfer it to another entity. And we immediately contacted one of the target companies that we had, and they told us they were interested, but they wanted us to come back when we had gotten sales to $1 million. So over a couple of years, we got sales to $2 million and went back, and the conversation changed, and they became a collaborator of ours, and eventually acquired the technology down the road. So that's a good potential for a startup to step in and again, do that early stage work to develop the technology and the intellectual property assets to the point where it becomes more attractive. So I don't know, Camille and Niraj, any comments from your side and how you approach licensing and maybe particularly the startup licensing?
Yeah, so I concur with you, Tim, as well. Now, apart from this, one other thing that we did, I think last year we implemented, and it has actually borne good results for us so far. We started advertising several of our available technologies on our website. So we started this web portal where we are listing the available technologies for licensure, and that has resulted in several inquiries from people even outside of our region, outside of our network, and has actually resulted in 2 licenses. And many of the discussions are still ongoing, but we've already concluded many of those deals. We've consummated many of those deals, and that was really very refreshing for us to see. What we observed was, as far as startups are concerned, there's a limited pool of entrepreneurs in our region here. And after a point, we really struggle to identify newer entrepreneurs for further spin-outs and development of our technologies. And so this advertising our technologies really opened up a whole new world of opportunities, and we are really thrilled about that. But yeah, apart from everything that Tim described, pretty much we pretty much same here.
Thanks, Tim and Niraj. So we do have a question about how our offices basically balance the pressure to make money from our licensing efforts with sort of the requirements that we need to file IP, on very early stage technologies today.
So, sorry, Tim, if you want to jump in, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say that's a great question. That's what we're all trying to address that balance. And certainly we have a strategy to, an income-driven strategy with our licenses. But it's a really tough game to play because we're basically, placing a lot of bets on intellectual property through filing patents that, we really don't know. We don't know what the commercial outcome will be. And, that's, I think, further challenged by the fact, as we mentioned earlier, the very early stage of these university discoveries and how much additional development work is required. So we do try to hold to a budget on our patenting activity. So we have a limited amount of resources that we have. But what we really focus on in our licensing agreements is finding, as early as we can, partners that are willing to license and help defray those patent costs. And the more successful we are there, the more patenting activity, that allows us to undertake.
Right. So as Tim mentioned, we pretty much view our patenting decisions as similar to an investor who's investing his dollars in various ventures. We are pretty much doing the same thing. We are betting on technologies by investing in terms of patenting dollars, patenting budget. It's not cheap. Patent processing, patenting process is not cheap by any means. And it's in a way, eventually it all averages out, just like for investors. Not every investment yields good returns. Likewise, for our office also, not every investment in patenting dollars yields returns for the university. We have to see it on an average, whether it's making good sense or not, whether we are averaging out or not. And at the end of the day, really, the mission for our office is not to make money primarily. Our primary mission is to support innovation, is to support research and development of any invention, discovery that happens on campus. We pledge to support those innovations, and that is what really drives us. And in doing so, if it brings returns, if it brings revenues back to the university, that's really an icing on the cake. But our primary mission is really to support innovation.
That's a great point, Niraj. I think that that also might show the differences in some tech transfer offices. I can let Tim speak in a minute as to Penn State's, but I think for many tech transfer offices, even though, yes, we do generate income for our institutions, many of our primary focus is really not on driving that sort of income. And it really is about supporting the researchers and the innovators. And really, at CHOP at least, it really is about getting technologies out and back to our patients. And so I think one of the focuses is, protecting the technologies, finding ways to creatively get them out when maybe the normal, strategies are just not going to work. And the other thing is that I think in terms of, you think about licensing, it's really protecting the researchers' rights to be able to continue their research, which I think is sometimes a little bit of a myth, which we didn't get to too many myths today, but I think that is one of the myths in terms of licensing, that it's going to restrict then the ability of the researchers to continue with their research. And I think that's one of the important things, that we ensure can continue in most tech transfer offices, that sort of standard in sort of protecting the research and the ability to continue the research.
Yeah, and I can add, Penn State is a land grant institution. We do have an overarching objective or mission to translate technology developed, from the use of public funds, for the public good. So that is certainly, our primary objective. When it comes to the revenue that is generated, I should mention that a majority of that revenue that comes back is shared within the university, back to the inventor groups, as well as their department. So that money, can be then put back, to further research and continue that research activity.
So we're coming to the close of our hour today. It's been a nice, lively conversation. I appreciate your time. There's one question that we didn't get to. I hope you might be able to address for a moment. And Camille, perhaps this one is for you. The question came up early in the conversation. You mentioned that diagnostics and software can be particularly challenging with respect to protectability or patentability. Would you care to comment on why that is sometimes the case?
Right, it's really due to case law. So, patents, they're legal documents. These are, even though they are published, they're not publications as we sort of traditionally think of publications. They are a legal document, which sort of can be, which has a certain value. We've obviously, talked about that in terms of the ability to restrict others from using them and license them. And therefore there's litigation around them, and often that litigation leads to changes in case law and the way that the patent office reviews patent applications. And in two areas in particular, in recent years, in the last 10 years, the biggest changes have been in the diagnostic and software space. And so for diagnostics, for many years, there's many companies that were created around IP on diagnostics, and case law has changed the ability for things that are purely diagnostic, so just an association between a biomarker and disease, that's no longer patentable. There are certain requirements in order to sort of put your diagnostic into the patentable space. And definitely, outside counsels can definitely help with sort of navigating that space, but there are ways to still file patent applications and get issued patents on diagnostic, but it's a lot trickier, and there's more things are required in order to ensure that you're not that your claims aren't purely directed to that association between the biomarker and the disease. In regards to software, I am a life science person. My background is in cell and molecular biology, and in my research in neuroscience, and most of my years practicing has been in the life science space. So I'm in no ways a software expert, but there's been recent changes in case law around software, and so things like pure algorithms, mathematical codes, those just are not patentable. And so it really has to be a software that's associated, say, with a device that puts it into that patentable subject matter.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Any final words from our panelists today?
I think the one thing that I would just, I would impart is that it's never too early to reach out to your technology transfer office, whether it's about your research or just general questions about what we do, how we do it, how we can help you and support you, or about intellectual property.
And I echo Camille's comments.
And also, it's never too late as well.
Good point.
Right.
Well, on behalf of everyone at BioStrategy Partners and our audience, we really do thank each of our expert panelists today for sharing their expertise with us and volunteering their time. It's extraordinarily helpful to our healthcare life sciences ecosystem. You can find this recording and others on commercialization topics on the BioStrategy Partners YouTube site at your leisure. In the meantime, thank you all, both audience members and panelists, for joining us today. Have a good day.